Hello to all my Bi-Conics Wrestling Podcast fans out there, and welcome to another long form edition of Beat the Clock for NXT this week for June 27th, 2023. I am your host, Mikey, and I will be taking you through this week's NXT as we review the second week of Gold Rush, which is the 2 week special in which every NXT championship is on the line. Man, before jump into this week's episode review, I do like to say after having watched both weeks of NXT Gold Rush, I think overall this was a big success for NXT for both weeks. I actually found myself enjoying this week a little bit more, but man, they were smart in how they broke up the championships for week 1 and week 2. And ultimately, I think this continues to show that even though NXT is a developmental brand, there's a lot of talent and stars that are ready to come out of NXT whenever they join the main roster. But with my personal thoughts out of the way, let's jump straight into our review. We're going to structure this review a little differently. I'm going to go through hour 1 and then hour 2. So that way, if you want to follow along, you may be able to do. So let's begin with the top of NXT, where we open up hour 1 and Gold Rush week 2 with our first match, which is for the NXT Women's Championship match between champion Tiffany Stratton and challenger Thea Hale. I will say I have my critiques with Thea's character. She is the embodiment of an excited puppy dog, where she is just full of energy and she's loud. But I'm slowly digging into that. And this match proved that this girl has a lot of potential. And of course, Tiffany, as always, has been the most improved wrestler over the last year. And I love the work that she's doing. I thought this was a great match through and through. Both women showed out and stepped up and did awesome things. I thought this was a really fun match. And we'll get into it in a little bit later. I don't think this feud is far from over, which I'm excited to see. I'm glad it's not a one and done. But to get into the finishing moments of this match, towards the end of this match, after Thea hits the Chase U against Tiffany, Tiffany counts out with a close 2 count, where Tiffany comes right back and spikes Hale to the mat, in which Hale counters the slam by putting in the Kimura lock on Stratton. As she has Stratton in the Kimura lock, Drew Gulak and Charlie Dempsey, who are there, as Tiffany goes to reach for the ropes, Charlie pulls the ropes back so it is out of reach, and Thea lets go of the Kimura lock to tell Drew Gulak and Charlie Dempsey, hey, I don't want to win this way. I need you guys to not do this. And then those two and Duke Hudson get into an argument on the apron. And as this is all happening, Tiffany tries to go for a clothesline, but ducks and takes down Tiffany in another Kimura lock where she proceeds to tap. But because the referee is busy with Duke and Charlie and Drew, the ref does not see Tiffany tap out. And as Thea goes to argue with the referee, Tiffany hits the most devastating move in all professional history, a surprise roll-up to pin Thea and retain her championship. Again, I thought this match was a lot of fun. I thought this was great, and I'm hoping to see that this feud is not over. After the match, however, is where things also got interesting. After the match was open and Tiffany stands tall and heads to the back, Drew Gulak and Charlie Dempsey, along with Duke Hudson, they all enter the ring, and the boys get into an argument of not yelling at Thea for losing, and then Drew and Charlie proceed to attack Duke, in which Chase U's music hits, and we get a returning Andre Chase where Duke and Andre take down Charlie and Drew, and it seems that those two are going to have a feud with Drew Gulak and Charlie Dempsey, which is going to be great. I'm happy to see that Chase U is all back together, and I really love that Duke Hudson is back from injury, so hopefully he has recovered well, and I'm excited to see where this feud takes us. Next, we have a hype package for Ilya Dragunov. I love Ilya Dragunov. I've loved him since NXT UK. His NXT Takeover match with Walter at the time, aka Gunther, for the NXT UK Championship was amazing. That match was stellar. It was so good. I'm excited to see what Ilya is going to bring to NXT, and hopefully that will also get us to have some more phenomenal matches. I hope he's the next one in line for the NXT Championship, but we shall see what happens with that. Prior to the next match, we get a backstage segment with Wolfgang and Mark Coffey of Gallus talking about how they haven't heard from Joe. Remember last week on NXT, Stax kidnapped Joe Coffey in the NXT parking lot, which, by the way, the NXT parking lot is like the most dangerous place in America, apparently. But it doesn't matter because they're going to deal with Stax afterwards, but they have their tag team title match as they're going to destroy Malik Blade and Idris Enofe, which proceeds to having Idris and Malik have their own little backstage segment, how it's their time, they're going to get things done, and they're going to win these tag titles. This leads into our next match of the evening. For the NXT Tag Team Championships, you have your champions Gallus taking on the challengers of Malik Blade and Idris Enofe. I really thought this match was entertaining. I will say that there were a couple of spots that were messy, and Malik and Idris messed up on some of the parts a little bit. But overall, I thought this was a fun match. The only thing I do hate is I hate picture, and then I hate when we go to commercial breaks in the middle of matches. I understand because this is a public access, public TV forum. You need to have your commercials and things like that. But this is not just for NXT. This is for all the wrestling on TV. I was like, can we figure out a way to like space these out? And picture is usually when we miss the fun stuff, which is annoying. But towards the end of this match, Enofe and Blade get a big double team on Wolfgang, but he kicks out. There's a bit of chaos as everyone gets involved, where Blade clotheslines Wolfgang into the ropes and he's stuck. Coffee takes out Blade and lays him out. At this point in the match, Stax runs down and looks to hit Coffee at ringside, but he hits Enofe instead, sending him into the steel ring steps. Stax rolls Enofe back into the ring, where Wolfgang scoops him up and hits the TKO into Coffey's flying knee for the pin to win and retain. So your winners of this match, and still NXT Tag Team Champions, are the Gallus Boys, still on top. This was a little, I'm weirded out by the fact that Stax is now aligning with Gallus. I hope this is a grand master plan, as we'll see later in tonight's episode of NXT, where Tony and Joe have some words, but we'll get into that more in depth later. Overall, I thought this was a fun match. Now, at the end of this match, though, we get a tease where as Gallus is standing tall and Stax is staring them down from ringside, we see in the crow's nest above, we see Angel Garza and Humberto Carrillo, Los Lotharios, looking down at Gallus. So are we potentially getting Gallus versus Los Lotharios for the next tag team championship feud? I would be here for that in all honesty, and that would make me really excited. I thought this was a really fun match, and I think it did live up to the expectation, though there was a couple of mess ups. I think Idris Enofe and Malik Blade continue to show that they are a tag team that needs to be watched out for. And as always, the Gallus Boys on top with their unorthodox style is a really fun thing to watch. After this, we get a brief backstage interview in which Mackenzie interviews Metaphor, which consists of Doem Nar, Ortho Mensa, Jakari Jackson, and Lash Legend. I still hate the name of this faction. I'll eventually get over it. And they're talking about how Lash Legend and Jakari Jackson over their victory last week for week 1, and Noam Dar is still not ready to emotionally process losing the NXT Heritage Cup Championship. So we'll see what happens with this faction. It seems that we're slowly going to get them to feud with Nathan and Dragon Lee and Ulisa Leon and all those people over there. It's going to be a lot of fun. We get an in-ring family meeting with the Schism next, in which there seems to be some cracks in the Schism, as I don't want to call them by their new names. The Grizzled Young Veterans is what they will always forever be to me. So the Grizzled Young Veterans have issue with Joe Gacy, and everything, and the cracks are beginning to show. And then in the middle of this in-ring segment with the family meeting, the Diamond Mine comes out, which consists of the Creed brothers and Ivy Nile. After a little back and forth, the Creed brothers and the Grizzled Young Veterans have the dyad. They have decided that they are going to have another match next week on NXT. And Joe Gacy proposes that to up the stakes, it will be a loser leaves NXT match. Cool, I guess. Now, this can go one of two ways. There have been wrestling reports that the Grizzled Young Veterans have been trying to get out of their contract and leave WWE, so I could see them losing, and then this is how they get released, which would be fine. However, the more shocking thing would be if the Creed brothers lose, so they're done with NXT, which means do they get called up to main roster? Like, there's so many what ifs, and I know there have been reports that supposedly there's going to be another round of NXT call ups to the main roster coming up soon. I think either before or after SummerSlam, which I have an issue with because of how big and bloated the main roster for Raw and SmackDown have been. Right now, I don't want them continuing to take NXT kids away from NXT because you're just gutting the roster. But on top of that, the NXT kids that have been called up since thanks to the draft, they haven't really been on television. Caden and Quintana have only had 2 matches. Where's Odyssey Jones? Grayson Waller, he broke his leg as we found out, so he hasn't really been wrestling, but he's on the Grayson Waller effect. Pretty Deadly have been put to use, which is a lot of fun. But other than that, like Alba Fire and oh my gosh, I'm blanking on names here. Isla Dawn, like they just lost the women's tag team unification match, so they're not there. Like, I have such a big worry when it comes to these NXT call ups because 2 different people are running 2 different shows, and you don't even have your main stars being booked all that often. So we'll see what happens with all that. But I'm interested to see who's going to leave NXT next week. Next, we get a quick backstage segment which sets up our next match where we have Frank Walker, Tank, Reggie, and Axiom all talking about the promo we got with our new NXT tag team coming in soon, which I believe are former football players. If I remember that announcement, I'm hoping to see them soon. This should be good. And they're talking about that. And then Nathan Frazier walks into frame with the Heritage Cup ready for his next match. And it seems that we're slowly teasing Axiom versus Nathan Frazier for the Heritage Cup. And I'm like, give it to me now because I am all here for it. We then get another backstage segment to end off hour 1, in which Trick Williams and Carmelo Hayes are talking to each other, getting ready for Carmelo's match in the main event against Baron Corbin tonight. And then who should appear but your World Heavyweight Women's Champion, Rhea Ripley. She comes and she delivers a message to Carmelo because of the fact that he got involved with Finn Balor in order to save Seth from being attacked last week and then being on Raw to battle Finn Balor on Monday Night Raw. She says that you better be careful because now you're in Judgment Day business and you better be prepared. So it seems we may continue to get this Judgment Day and Carmelo feud, which I appreciate because we're crossing main roster to NXT, and I think Carmelo proved on Monday Night Raw that he's a future star and that he's ready for the main time. We begin hour 2 of NXT now, Gold Rush Week 2, with a match for the NXT Heritage Cup Championship between champion Nathan Frazier versus challenger Dragon Lee. Y'all, when I tell you this was such a fun match, I thought this was awesome. This match, I know most people aren't used to Heritage Cup rules. As somebody who has been an avid fan of NXT UK and has seen NXT UK, is very familiar with this match type, and I thought this was awesome. Ultimately, going back and forth, Nathan Frazier gets the first pinfall, Dragon Lee quickly gets the second, and then we're at a tie mark where Frazier blocks a powerbomb from Lee for a 2, holding him down. They keep going back and forth, get tangled in position, but Frazier is able to keep Dragon Lee held down for the pin and win to retain with 1 second left in round 5, which means that your winner and still NXT Heritage Cup champion Nathan Frazier. After the match, Frazier stands tall as the music hits, and Dragon Lee hands Frazier the Heritage Cup out of a show of respect. I love this little faction of these two guys and then the girls as well. I think this is an awesome, and I love it. After this match, like a video vignette package of Eddie Thorpe training with Gable Stevenson, as Gable is training Eddie to get ready for the NXT Underground match that is going to happen next week against Eddie and Damon Kemp. It's interesting to see Gable Stevenson be presented this way and to be revealed this way now that he's finally there. I'm interested to see how this match goes, and overall, I thought this quick promo between them did its purpose, and we'll see what happens next week. After this, we get a backstage segment in which NXT North American champion Wesley is talking to another NXT person, Miles Bourne, backstage. At this point, Mustafa Ali walks in. As Miles Bourne leaves, Mustafa Ali apologizes for getting a little too crazy as the referee in the NXT North American Championship last week, and he just wanted things to be a clean finish. He may have gotten involved. Wesley says that Ali should just stick to being a wrestler. Tyler Bate comes in and expresses his frustration over what happened during the championship match last week and how Ali called the match unfairly. Tyler Bate then says he wants another shot at the North American Championship, but Ali wants that shot. Bate also offers to be special guest referee. And then as Ali and Tyler continue to argue, West takes his championship and he walks off. I like this little story that we got going on in the North American Championship scene. We're slowly starting to move away from Wesley wanting to fight everybody to having like a few opponents for a long period of time happen. And I'm interested to see who's going to be Wesley's next challenger, which we'll get into towards the end of this particular episode. All right, so we get this weird short backstage segment in which Robert Stone is looking for Von Wagner. Stone ends up finding Von Wagner and says that they were supposed to meet up to talk more about Von Wagner's life. But Von says Stone wouldn't understand and mentions everything that his family has gone through from last week, learning about the heartbreaking event that Von and his family had to go to with him having to get surgery in his skull and all that stuff. Von says that Stone doesn't get it and he can't do this right now and walks off, leaving Stone by himself. Look, I have admitted on the podcast and on these reviews that I'm not the biggest fan of Von Wagner. I know he's a big guy. He really needs to work on his acting and his promo skills, which I think having Robert Stone as a mouthpiece should work. But I do appreciate the dimension that we're going to. I just hope that I hope NXT is just very careful not to utilize personal trauma like that to fuel storyline, because there have been many examples in past where this kind of storyline is very distasteful and it doesn't end up being a good storytelling technique. So I hope they just continue to handle this with care. But as much as not a fan of Von Wagner, then I am interested to see where this goes. Next up is the first non-championship match that we have on this episode of NXT for Gold Rush, and it is Kiana James taking on Gigi Dolan. This match spawned from the two women going back and forth that Kiana doesn't believe in Gigi's artistic ability and that it is all a dream, and then Gigi says no. Overall, I thought this was an okay match. Kiana is improving very well. I think she proved herself at the Iron Woman Survivor Challenge back in December that she can go, and her tag team run with Hal and Henley was a lot of fun. And it's nice to see that Kiana is now entering a different feud, this time with Gigi, and that we're getting these women away from the storylines that they've been involved in for the last couple of months, which I appreciate. As we get to the closing end, Kiana slams Gigi's head into the mat a couple of times, and she is offering more offense to the floor to try to go for a pin attempt. But at this point, the crowd gets behind Gigi as she fights to her feet to drop Kiana and then clothesline her. After some more back and forth, Kiana levels Gigi, but they both go down and the referee checks on them. Kiana grabs her loaded purse and tries to use it, but the ref stops her. Gigi takes advantage of this to connect with a big kick, and then the crucifix pin to pick up the victory. Your winner of this match is Gigi. Again, nothing special, but I do appreciate how far Kiana has come, and Gigi Dolan is slowly becoming one of my favorites now that she is being presented as this face. After the match, however, as Gigi stands tall and her music hits, Kiana attacks her with her purse, laying Gigi out, in which at this point Kiana takes out two paint cans and pours paint all over Gigi as the fans boo. I'm interested. This feud is going to be far from over. I'm interested to see how they develop the storyline even further, and if there's any depth to this besides "I don't like you" thing, which seems to be unfortunately a lot of the time we see women wrestlers be stuck in this kind of feud storyline trope of "I don't like you, so I'm gonna do everything in my power to make you feel less than," which is what if it's done well, it works. It's just that I'm tired of always seeing the constant trope and that we need more depth when it comes to the women's storytelling. But since we're at the beginning stages of this, I'm willing to give it a little bit of grace to see how we end up with what's left over. Next up, we get this Joe Coffey and Tony D'Angelo segment, which I appreciate. I love the weirdness. And as silly as the storyline has been, I enjoy the silliness. But the ultimate thing that has happened with this story is that Joe seems to have escaped, goes to see Tony D'Angelo, and ultimately Joe tells him that Stax has turned on Tony and then plays a video recording of Stax working out a deal and just do that he's the new underboss and that he's the new boss and everything. And then Joe closes, like, hangs up the phone, taunts Tony, and then leaves. I think this is a master plan, and I can't believe I'm actually saying this. I think this is a ruse. I think Tony and Stax are still a team, and I think they're playing mind games with Gallus, and then ultimately, I think Tony and Stax are going to take the titles off of Gallus. It's just a matter of when, as I'm interested to see what happens with all this. After this, we get a quick little recap of what happened on the Snapchat Live that happened earlier this week, in which Blair Davenport attacked Roxanne Perez on the NXT Snapchat show. And then we get confirmation that next week on NXT, it will be Roxanne versus Blair. And then we get to see all the main event competitors walking backstage, getting ready to go to the ring. And so we'll see what happens. Prior to this, we get JC Jane backstage ranting about Lyra Valkyria to Tatum Paxley and some of the other NXT girls. She promises to take care of Lyra if he shows up tonight. Lyra now is behind Jane listening to her rant, where Lyra proceeds to drop Jane and remind her that she does not play games. At this point, as JC is still on the floor, Rhea Ripley walks up and basically taunts Jane and says that you deserved it. Lyra's a badass. Which is weird because I know Rhea Ripley currently is a heel, but the fact that she said that to JC is awesome. And for all the NXT UK people, Rhea and Lyra in the independent scene and the British wrestling scene and just in independence in general have crossed paths. And I'm actually excited for JC versus Lyra feud. I love that NXT is starting to build more women's feuds. And we're getting more women's storylines outside of just the NXT Women's Championship. So this should be fun. Next, we get Ava Rain and the Dyad are backstage now. The Dyad want to know what was up with Joe Gacy booking them in a loser leaves NXT match, and Ava tells them that they need to calm down. Ava says that they think the Dyad is a strong team, where Jagger Reed has issues with others making decisions that impact their careers, but Ava then retorts by saying that they are fighting for their careers, and Joe does have a plan. Jagger says if Joe doesn't, he and Rip will have a plan. So again, we're furthering the dissension of the schism. And so this should I'm interested to see. Again, I mentioned this earlier in the review, but I'm interested to see that if the Dia loses, are they done with WWE period? Or If the Creeds lose, are they getting called up to main roster? But we shall see what happens. Before diving into the main event, we get a bumper for what is advertised for next week. So next week we have the Creeds in a special 4th of July episode, because 4th of July is next week on Tuesday. We get the Creeds versus the Dyad in a loser leaves NXT match. We have Mustafa Ali versus Tyler Bate. They didn't mention it, but I wouldn't be surprised if this turns into a number one contenders match for the North American Championship. We have Roxanne Perez versus Claire Davenport in a singles match, which I'm really excited because both women are amazing and they can go. And in an NXT Underground match, we have Eddie Thorpe versus Damon Kemp. Just from these 4 matches alone, I'm really excited because I think this match is going to be phenomenal. All these matches advertised, I think, are going to be a lot of fun and phenomenal. Now, we have our main event for week 2 of Gold Rush, which sees Carmelo Hayes taking on challenger Baron Corbin for the NXT Championship. Off the bat, Baron Corbin comes in with his Lone Wolf gimmick and theme song, and my God, has it been a long time since we've seen that, and I like the Lone Wolf character better. Y'all, when I tell you that this match was phenomenal, y'all need to go watch this because I think this is the best Carmelo has looked in the last couple of months. Not to say that he's been bad prior to all this, but I think combining what he showed on Monday Night Raw this week and what he showed at Gold Rush yesterday, this kid is a future star. And Baron Corbin and him had such a good match. I thought this was a solid main event. To get into kind of finishing sequence of this match, Corbin catches Carmelo Hayes and gives him a deep 6 where Hayes kicks out just in time for the crowd to start chanting NXT. Carmelo picks up Hayes, but Hayes blocks the end of days. At this point, Carmelo kicks Baron Corbin to the apron and then blocks a chokeslam and hangs him over the top rope. Hayes launches himself over the top rope where and spikes Corbin into the edge of the apron with a DDT. Hayes rolls Corbin back into the ring and goes to the top and then hits the nothing but net, which is like a top rope leg drop in the middle of the ring to pin Baron Corbin and retain the NXT Championship. Again, my notes are very bare for this match because this match was so entertaining and it was so much fun that I stopped taking notes. This was really good, and I'm happy to see Carmelo retain the title because I wasn't sure if they were going to give it to Baron, given the fact that Carmelo lost to Finn on Monday Night Raw, which, again, I have issues with champions losing, but it is what it is. Like, I learned to get over it. I think this was an awesome match. Baron Corbin, funny enough, I hope he sticks around NXT for a little bit because this was a refreshing feud, and I thought this was awesome. Carmelo Hayes continues to show that he is a fighting champion, and I'm interested to see who his next opponent is going to be because we'll see what happens. Which actually brings to how we ended this episode of NXT. The camera cuts backstage and we hear Braun Breaker yelling inside of Shawn Michaels' office. And Braun is yelling how he's beaten everyone and no one can control him, where he proceeds to storm out of Shawn Michaels' office and the cameraman asks what's going on. And Braun tells the cameraman to shut up and that everyone will have to find out next week as Braun pushes the cameraman to the ground, which how we end Gold Rush Week 2 as it goes off the air. And that is going to be the end of this week's review for NXT Gold Rush Week 2. What are my final thoughts? I think overall, Week 2 of Gold Rush was awesome. I really enjoyed all the championship matches. I even enjoyed Kiana versus Gigi, which wasn't a title match, but I thought it was still a good match nonetheless. And I think, in a weird way, NXT's, while the booking decisions and the writing might be questionable for me a lot of the times, as I will constantly say, one thing I appreciate about NXT is that the pacing is well thought out. I feel like everything serves a purpose. Everything is spaced out. You have a good amount of matches, backstage segments, video vignettes spliced into the places where it needs to be, that not only focuses on what's happening on the current week, but advertises and gets you ready for what's to come in the next couple of weeks for NXT. I think overall, NXT Gold Rush for both weeks was very phenomenal. If I had to pick my favorite match of the 2 weeks, I'm gonna have to say I'm gonna cheat because this is a tie. I think the main events for both week 1 and week 2 were probably my favorite matches. Seth versus Braun was phenomenal. Carmelo versus Baron was also phenomenal. And I think Carmelo and Braun are the future of this generation for NXT kids and of the future WWE stars. And I'm excited to see what they can do. I love NXT, and I will unapologetically be saying this all the time. I think NXT is a phenomenal show. I know it was iffy when we got to the 2.0 and the Nickelodeon slime era, as we like to call it, but I think they found their footing. And if they continue to go on and continue to give us fun TV shows and specials, and then when they show out at the PLEs as they have been, I'm really excited to see, because now we're starting to build towards the Great American Bash, which is the next paid live premium live event for NXT, which happens on Sunday, July 30th. So we have about 4 to 5 weeks to build this. So I'm excited to see what ends up being the final card for that, and I can't wait to watch and review that one as well. But like I said, that concludes this week's NXT review. Unfortunately, there will not be a review for the July 4th episode, as your host is going to be going on a little bit of a vacation. But do not fret, I will be back in 2 weeks where I'll do a quick recap of the 4th of July episode, and then I will give you my detailed thoughts on the NXT episode for July 11th. But this has been your long form version of Beat the Clock Challenge for NXT this week. If you want to see a more condensed version of this review, make sure to go check out our socials at BC WrestlePod across the Instagrams and the TikToks and the Twitter to see me attempt to review this week's NXT in under 5 minutes. Make sure to also subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can see NXT long form reviews as well as long form reviews for all of your weekly wrestling from AEW, Impact, WWE. We cover it all, which is a lot, trust me. Make sure to also check us out on the YouTube for our other series, Hot Tag, in which our host Adolfo breaks down the week's wrestling news in bite-sized 2 to 3 minutes chunks, so that way it is a quick watch that will keep you informed on all the things happening in professional wrestling. I have been your host, Mikey, and that is your NXT review. Until next time, remember, keep on enjoying your professional wrestling. And as always, adios and sayonara.